My name is Julia. I'm the owner of Formaggio Kitchen, and tonight's theme is mountain cheese. I don't, as you know, I recognize a lot of faces, a few new faces as well, but I don't have great impulse control when it comes to cheese. And I've been really wanting to do fondue for a while, even though I know it's a lot of cheese. But I knew this is a lot of folks last month that you're doing the club. So I wanted to do something really special. So that's why we have the fondue pack. And the theme is all kind of surrounded by the concept of mountain cheese. And every mountain cheese and fondue are kind of, they coexist beautifully. So obviously we're not going to snack on the fondue tonight unless you've already prepared it, which if you have, kudos, you get bonus points. But we are going to be tasting the other three cheeses, and I'm going to be talking about the fondue and the origin of fondue and kind of how all the cheeses play into it. So if you want to lay out your cheeses, I have a very firm rule when I do tastings that people should eat very quickly right away. I don't want to talk before you've started eating. So we're going to talk about the fondue in the middle of the tasting so that you already have some stuff in your belly. But the order in which we're tasting the three cheeses is going to be, we're going to start with the Monte Veronese Malga. Okay. Which is the Italian mountain cheese. The next cheese we're going to do is Coeur de Savoie, the aged Savoyard cheese. And then the last cheese that we're going to taste and talk about is going to be the Alpha Tolman from Vermont. So that's going to be the order. And then as you saw, you should have also received a little jar of this pepper jelly. So it's a blend of piquillo peppers and pimenta spalette. It's sweet, it's a little bit spicy, and it's from the foothills of the Pyrenees. So a lot of the cheeses that we're talking about reference the Alps, different mountain range further south, but still, again, our theme in general is talking about sort of the traditions of cheeses in the mountains. We couldn't do that without throwing in a little something from the Pyrenees. We have a very large group tonight. It seems like folks are still flowing in, which is great. If you've never attended one of our live sessions before, we're very casual. I encourage you to have your speaker off when you, hi, there's a little cat going by. I encourage you to have your speaker unmuted if you want to ask a question. If you'd prefer to use the chat box, Morgan is here and she will alert me to any chats that may come in because I get a little bit too kind of engrossed in the cheeses. So she'll interrupt me if you prefer to use the chat box. But you can always unmute yourself, ask questions. I'm going to be asking your opinion as well. So be prepared for that if you want to share any thoughts. If you have any questions about what you're tasting, if I use a term that you might not know or don't understand or just need some clarity, please, by all means, interrupt, let me know. These sessions are for you, so I want them to be geared towards what you want to learn. So without further ado, are we all ready to start eating? I have to ask, did anyone already make your fondue? Okay. Awesome. Are you eating it tonight or did you make it right away?
No, we already ate it.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
We're way ahead of you.
We did.
Okay, good. Well, you get bonus points. So I'm really excited. When we start talking about the fondue, I definitely want to hear your thoughts and what you thought of it. But we're going to start out with the Monte Veronese. So this is Monte Veronese is a PDO cheese. And what PDO means is a protected designation of origin. So that is it's a very sort of specialized cheese or product actually in the EU where that named cheese could only be made in a particular region. And oftentimes there are even more regulations piled on top of that. It could be a particular recipe. It could be they must abide by certain breeds of animals, like milk only coming from particular breeds of animals. So this is a protected mountain cheese in northern Italy, up in the Alps. And it is from the Lacini Mountains. And this is extra special because traditionally you see Monte Veronese or you see Monte Veronese latte intero. You don't often in the United States see Monte Veronese Malga. So, and Monte Veronese is such a classic Italian name for cheese because it literally means like the Veronese mountains. Italians are very literal when they name their cheeses. It's very much based on sort of a region and origin, and that is about it. Now, Malga is a term that is actually new to Voyage Fromage, but it references a term that we've talked about in the past, which is alpage. Alpage is a term that they use in France or Switzerland to talk about cheeses only made in very, very high elevations and traditionally only made with summertime milk. And so Malga is the Italian version of that term. And so this cheese is made by a small family farm that we have been working with. I remember actually when this cheese came to Formaggio Kitchen for the very first time, it was 2010 when we first imported it. And it was a very exciting time to have this brand new Italian cheese on our counter. And we learned about the family. It's a family farm that started in the 1920s. And in a classic fashion with a lot of our small farmstead producers that we're seeing and featuring in Voyage Fromage, it was handed down to the children. And so now the kids are, well, since then, obviously it's been grandparents or great-grandparents, grandparents, but now it's the kids, Gildo, Giovanni, and Letizia, who are making this cheese for us. And this is also considered a farmhouse cheese or a farmstead cheese, where they are milking the animals and making the cheese all in the same area. And so that gives them a lot more control over the process. And because of that as well, it is a raw milk cheese. This cheese is most akin to a Piave Vecchio, if you've ever had it. But I think the difference is, it's aged about the same amount. So this cheese is about 24 months old. So it's quite aged, especially for the size. It's not a massive cheese. It's, I'd probably have to guess, but probably the wheels are about 20 to 30 pounds. So it's, when you're talking about Comté, that's an 80-pound wheel, or Parmesan, that's 80 to 100-pound wheel. And so that's traditionally, very common to see cheeses of that size aged up to 2 years. But to have a slightly smaller cheese aged that long is a bit more unusual, but not necessarily so in the Italian mountains. What I love about this cheese is it is very different than a lot of the Alpine mountain cheeses we get on the other side of the border when you go to France or Switzerland, because they are not washing it. The rind treatment of this cheese is very different. And we are going to compare it to Alpha Tolman, because Alpha Tolman is a little bit more classic to how the Swiss and the French make their Alpine cheeses. And so what you have with this cheese is a rind where you're not encouraging mold growth, or you're not encouraging bacterial growth. So we've got 3 very distinct rinds from the regions that we're tasting tonight. You've got this rind from Monteveronese, which is very clean. So the idea is to have a rind that's either brushed and, it's cleaned frequently, either with olive oil, sometimes rubbed in salt. What that does is it inhibits any mold growth and makes the cheese very, very clean. Whereas the Savoie style rinds that we've had before, they love mold. They want the mold to grow. They, in fact, are very known for a mold called mucor. The sort of layman's terms for it is cat hair, because it literally looks like cat hair. And they pat down, the mold and they let it dry out. They pat it some more. And so with that comes a lot of earthiness that permeates into the cheese over time. And so you get a much earthier cheese. And then lastly, similar to the Alpha Tolman or the Swiss style, you have a rind where they actually encourage the growth of a bacteria. And I'll dig into that a little bit later, but that is washed in a brine. And that brine helps to encourage that bacteria to grow, which creates sort of more of a savory, slightly funky flavor profile. So all very traditional to, the Alpine mountains, but different areas of the Alps. If you've ever tried to get from Italy to Switzerland or France, crossing, I always imagine, because we do this trip quite a lot, and when we're, we usually start in Italy and we drive up to go to visit our Savoie producers or to go up to the Jura for Comté. And I always imagine, when we're passing through that tunnel in the mountain in the middle of the Alps, right through, I just imagine what it would be like before these roads and highways were created, and how passable these mountain ranges were, if at all. Even in the summertime, which is when we're going, the peaks are still covered in snow, and just it's really interesting to see. And when you see these traditional recipes, it's not a surprise that they've been kind of held on to for so long, because it is such sort of a enclosed, impassable area to a certain extent. You are sort of trapped in the mountains, especially in the wintertime, but there's something to be said for the culture there. All right. Now this jam, my favorite, I'm really excited to have this on the middle cheese, the Cour de Savoie, but I encourage you to taste it with all of them, because I actually think it goes really nicely with all of them. But what do you all think about this cheese? I'm very curious. It's new for, we've never had this at Voyage Fromage before.
We really like it. It's good.
Yeah. I love it with some honey on the side.
Oh yeah. It the thing that always shocks me is how the texture remains so nice and supple, even though it's so old. You'd expect it to be a bit drier, but it just has such a nice texture and sweetness. We had many years ago, I don't know when, to be honest, it all kind of blends together. I'm coming up on my 20th year at Formaggio Kitchen, so time is now just an amorphous blob. But I remember I was just a cheesemonger at the time, working on the counter, and our manager suggested a sort of challenge for all the cheesemongers and said, pick a cheese that you've never sold before. And I always gravitated towards, as a new young monger, I always gravitated towards French cheeses. I'm not sure why. They just felt more familiar and easier for me. And so when I had to pick a cheese that I hadn't or not sold frequently, I picked Monteveronese Malga. And of course, I got a piece to take home. And it was like a complete revelation for me. because it became one of my favorite cheeses at that point. You know, I needed to get taken out of my comfort zone to sit down and taste this cheese and think about it and realize that this incredible cheese had been in front of me this whole time. And so that's something that I do now is actually, I ask all the new mongers to pick a cheese for me. You know, I try not to pick cheeses for myself because I want them to, you know, I want to be surprised every time. And so it's a really fun process to kind of never know what you're going to get. And that's why this one holds a place in my heart, because it like totally changed my perspective about like trying different cheeses and not always defaulting to the same thing all the time. So any other thoughts about this one? All right.
I like it too because it's the nutty, tasty, and the sweetness together. You know, out of these three, that's my best.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Awesome. It really is. It's got such a pronounced sweetness to it. You know, it almost has like fruity notes. It's really, really, really unique and interesting. And that does come from the clean rind, because cheeses of this age can get pretty funky and pretty gnarly. And so it's that when you see, and if you are ever in Cambridge, let me know. Send me an email, because I'll show you the cave. And when you see this wheel in our cave, you know, the rind is very pristine. It's very clean. It's almost oily because there's just absolutely no mold on it whatsoever. And it almost looks like it's very similar to Parmesan when you see the rind of it, where it's aged, obviously, it's old cheese. But like if you took a bite of this rind, it's not gonna, you know, flavor wise, you're not going to get as much funkiness as you would if you tried either of the other two rinds. So a fun little experiment if you want to try. So I know some made the fondue already, which is awesome. So the fondue is a classic recipe that we created just for this, just highlighting cheeses from different regions. So included in it, we wanted to do to kind of honor the tasting tonight, French, Italian, and Swiss. And so we've got a little Swiss Emmentaler, which is the mild, like creamy base. Fontina Val d'Aosta, which is also your creamy, smooth base. You need good melters. I think a lot of people make a mistake of thinking that fondue is all Gruyere. It's not necessarily, because that's going to be too intense. You've got to layer the flavors. And so you want sort of base layers of really mild cheeses, and then build on either strong nutty cheeses, funky cheeses, or a combination of the two. And so the last one, of course, is the Comte 30 month, which gives it a ton of nuttiness and intensity. And the recipe that we included is there are different recipes based on the region. So we included a recipe, if you got it by, Morgan sent it in an email for a Swiss style fondue, which I think is the most classic. You can also make a Savoyard style fondue, but it's got an obscene amount of wine in it. And so you just have to be ready for like when I first made it, I was like, this is so soupy. Like it was much soupier than I was expecting. But when you look at traditional books on old recipes, I was just perusing. I've got a wonderful, really old French cheese book that has a recipe for Savoyard fondue that calls for an entire bottle of wine. And I'm just like, this is wild. So we wanted to go with something a little bit more classic and safe. And then, of course, we have a lovely local bakery in Cambridge called Iggy's. And we included, instead of crackers, the Coruscant spelt bread, so that you could have something to dip into your fondue. They just do a beautiful rustic ancient grain bread. So it's whole wheat with a nice crust. So fondue, I'm going to just briefly talk a little bit about the history of how it came about. The Swiss Union, the sort of Swiss cheese union, was founded in 1914, which not coincidentally, was the beginning of the war, and it was a way for Swiss cheese and dairy farmers to protect their product and protect kind of the legacy of what they were doing. And so what it did was, the Swiss Union is considered many different things. I've definitely heard of it called the Swiss Mafia or the Swiss Cheese Mafia. So there's many pros and cons, but basically they set the price not only of cheese, but also of milk, so that the farmers would be paid a certain rate no matter what. And the Swiss government would subsidize any discrepancy, essentially. So that's the pro, obviously, is that, farmers were being taken care of at a time when a lot of places you see, like Belgium, during the war, farmers, farmers were fleeing quite literally their profession, and not coming back for generations. So it did actually help to maintain a lot of Swiss cheesemaking traditions. But the other side is there was a lot of control, in that they were really only controlling 3 cheeses being made. And so those were the only cheeses being exported, and the exporters didn't actually own the cheeses. The Swiss Union did. And so all the cheesemakers and affineurs were essentially just being paid for their skill, not necessarily for the actual cheese itself, if that makes sense. And so what it did was it actually de-incentivized Swiss cheesemakers to make anything except for these 3 cheeses, because they felt like if they did make them, they were kind of bullied by the Swiss Union to not make them, and were unsupported in that sense internally. But also they weren't getting the same support that the other cheesemakers were getting, who were making these 3 main Swiss cheeses. And so again, pros and cons of that. But one of the pros, and getting back to fondue, is the Swiss Union invested a ton of money into marketing. And so around the 50s and 60s, they decided to start marketing fondue, especially to the American market. And so not only did you have a sort of influx of fondue from folks coming back from the war, but then also at World's Fairs, they were promoting the fondue. And so you saw fondue being promoted as this sort of luxurious, fancy, sexy food that really traditionally was just village food. It was not anything except this little village recipe, but it was a really great way to sell all of these really traditional Swiss cheeses, because God forbid you make fondue without these protected cheeses. So the Swiss Union was disbanded in 1999. And so at that point, that's when you saw a surge of sort of innovation in Switzerland of various recipes. Some people kind of reawakening old recipes, but then also just innovative new recipes. So now we see a lot more variety of cheeses coming out of Switzerland. But we have been left with the sort of, this imprint, I guess, of fondue on our culture, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But that's how fondue became popularized. It really was not anything beyond a Swiss marketing scheme, but it's something that I think we all hold dear now and absolutely love. And it's fantastic that this tiny little village recipe has gotten passed along and sort of become part of our own tradition as well. So what did you guys think of the recipe if you've had it?
I thought it was really out of the ordinary.
Yeah, in a good way.
Yeah, it was really different than what I normally use for fondue, which I switch Gruyere for the French cheese. Typically, but I use
yes. I mean, that is very traditionally, obviously, you'd use Swiss cheeses. Thank goodness the Swiss Union is disbanded, so I have nothing to worry about. But But yeah, this is definitely a stronger fondue, a bit nuttier. But you can, that's what I kind of love about fondue is that with a good base, you can kind of gear it towards any palate and any flavor profile. So if you want something a little bit more pungent, you could add in something like Vacheron Fribourgeois, which is a really funky aged wash rind cheese from Switzerland. Milder, you could do a younger Comté. So really the sky's the limit, but
It was great.
good. Anybody else? Are you guys, Matt, and I'm sorry, are you guys eating it now? Did I see?
We tried it on some toast, like a grilled cheese toast.
Nice. And how did you like it?
It was delicious.
Very good.
It's my favorite so far.
Oh, good. That's awesome. Terrific. And don't be intimidated by, fondue. It's really, I'd say just play with it. And, a good whisk is really your best tool for making a good fondue. And don't be, frustrated if it breaks. I think people think that if it breaks, you're done. But it's really easy to just, liven it up again. And at the end of the day, it's melted cheese. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But classically, my favorite accompaniments with fondue are pretty classic, which is bresaola, which is an air-cured beef, and cornichon. One of my all-time favorite is those, because the bresaola is, you could do bresaola or Bunderfleisch. Bunderfleisch is Austrian, and same thing, air-cured beef, but it's a little bit pressed. And both of them have like a sourness. Bresaola is Italian, and that sort of, and I know like, whenever I say sour, this happened to me at a cave tour recently where I was describing a Portuguese cheese as sour, and everybody kind of was like, why are you speaking negatively about your cheeses? I talk about sour not in a negative connotation. I love sour flavors, and I think they add a lot, especially to a cheese plate, because of how they balance out the fattiness. So I love that with fondue as a little accompaniment. All right. And has anybody tried the pimento spalette jelly yet with the cheeses?
Yeah.
It's good, right?
Really good. Little spice, but sweet.
A little. So
Really nice.
if you make a grilled cheese or a cheese toast with that fondue, spread a little bit of this on first. It's so good on grilled cheese. It is the best. And you don't need much. It's just like that tiny hint of sweetness and a little bit of spice is so good.
Cool.
Yeah, you can really go down a rabbit hole and make some good grilled cheeses if you have 300 cheeses to choose from.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's not a bad gig. All right. So the next cheese we're going to do is called Coeur de Savoie. And Coeur de Savoie, I apologize. There's a typo on our little card. It is only cow's milk. Sometimes it can be made with goat's milk as well, but this version that you guys have is just cow. So I wanted to clarify that. It's also known as Mule de Savoie, which is, mule is a windmill. And this cheese is basically the Savoie answer to Comté. I kind of like call it declassified Comté. It's a bit smaller of a wheel. It's only about 60 pounds, whereas Comté is about 80 pounds. It's made in the same fashion where it is a cooked pressed cheese. It's also raw milk. It's generally aged about 24 months. And so I mentioned cooked pressed cheese and raw milk in the same sentence. And I know that's confusing sometimes because cooking, okay, I'll start at the beginning. Pasteurization only happens with milk. So when you have your milk and it's raw and you add your rennet, the milk coagulates into curds and whey. So at this point, you can no longer pasteurize a cheese even if you wanted to, because it is no longer in milk form. So once you have your curds, you have to expel moisture from your curds. That is a tenet of cheese making, unless you're making a really young cheese or a really soft cheese. When you're making aged cheeses, you got to get rid of that moisture. And there's a lot of residual. I'm sure you've all had cottage cheese before. You know, there's a lot of moisture in there. That's what you should be picturing is cottage cheese. And you need to figure out how to create a wheel of cheese and get as much of that moisture out using that cottage cheese. And the size of the curd is actually incredibly important, because when you watch these cheesemakers, when they add in the rennet and they separate the curd from the whey, they're actually aiming for a particular curd size. And the curd size really matters. Typically with aged cheeses, you want a smaller curd because, again, easier to expel moisture. Whereas if you're making a really soft cheese like a brie or a camembert, oftentimes instead of cutting the curd with like a wire sort of harp, you are literally ladling the curd into forms because you want to keep that curd as full as possible to retain the moisture. So, it really depends on the style of cheese that you're making. But with this one, we're trying to expel moisture. So various ways of expelling moisture. One way is salt. And, again, we're talking about mountain cheeses and alpine cheeses, and salt is not a readily available ingredient 100 years ago up on the top of a mountain. And beyond that, these are massive wheels of cheese. And so you're going to need more than just salt to expel all that moisture. So the other way in which you can expel moisture from a cheese is once you put it into that form, you have a nice press on top of it that's about the same size as the wheel of cheese. And it's a wooden press with a nice hand crank. And underneath, you've got, all of your curds in their form. My dog was doing really great until just now. She gets very upset when I have cheese out and I don't share it. So we've got the curds all in the form, and then the press, and then you've got heat from underneath. So you've got oftentimes an open fire underneath, and you are gently heating the curd, and not only the heat, but the process of pressing it while it's being heated expels a ton of moisture. And so that's what you're going to see with the next two cheeses. So the Coeur de Savoie and the Alpha Tolman are cooked pressed cheeses, but they're both raw milk cheeses. And so that process is meant to get that really smooth paste. You see how there's no eyes or holes or anything in it. Same with where's my camera? There it is. Alpha Tolman. That's, there's no fissures or anything. That's what you get from the cooked pressed curd. So let's give this one a taste. This is also quite aged, being, again, bigger than the Monte Veronese, but smaller than Comté, but still aged about 24 months. Much earthier flavor profile. A lot of that can have to do with the mold that's present in the Savoie Mountains. Their cheeses tend to be a lot earthier and more savory. This is the one that I picked with the jam in my head. It also has a lot of chocolatey notes. I just did a training for our bakery team on our chocolates today, so that could be why I'm thinking chocolate. But I swear it has almost like a finish of that sort of like cocoa nib, that slight bitterness that you get from when you just get a really nice dark chocolate. So what do you all think of this one?
I didn't taste the chocolate till you said it.
Really? But then did you taste it? I'm not crazy, right?
It's there. Yes.
Okay, good. I realized after I said chocolate, I was like, I just ate a lot of chocolate. So an hour ago. So maybe that's just too front of my mind, but it really, that finish, I really tasted a lot of chocolate. So I'm glad you also tasted it.
Really went well with the jam.
Yes, that.
Yes.
One thing I love about pairing, and Sometimes if you have a really strong cheese and you add another element to it, like a jam, or oftentimes something with sweetness, it could be wine, it will mask some of the, and I don't think pairings, I'm going to say real quick, I don't think pairings should mask all of a thing. But sometimes it can tone down or slightly mask some of the more aggressive flavors. And then all of those underlying flavors that you would never taste if you ate it by itself,
Remember this, but I would agree. It does taste like something.
you would not be able to taste it otherwise. Because those
Almost like mold on citrus fruit or something. Yeah, I don't like it.
those intense aggressive notes are being slightly sort of toned down. So then all of the sort of nuance underneath kind of shines. And that's really fun to try. I think down there, we'll definitely, I've always wanted, you'll have to tell me what you guys think. I've always wanted to do some really pungent cheeses in the Voyage Fromage. A little nervous because I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but if it's something that you're interested in, you know, give me a shout, because I think those are really fun to do pairings with, because they can be really aggressive, but then they can totally change when you add in another element to them. So
This would not have gone well with a fig or a cherry condiment, but it went really well with this.
good. I agree with you. I think people default to fig a lot for everything, which is fine. I think it is actually a pretty safe option, but you're right. It doesn't always go with everything. And I like to, I mean, pairings are one of my favorite things to do. It's how I learned at Formaggio Kitchen when I first started, because, you know, I was working there part-time. I was making $10 an hour. And so but I wanted to try everything. So I signed up to teach every class I could, because I knew I could pull whatever I wanted off the shelves and open it up. but then I had to learn about everything and really deep dive and like dig in. So it was great. It was mutually beneficial, but that's how I got to try everything. And I always tried to do these weird pairings because, you know, I wanted to try, you know, this fun condiment or this weird vinegar and see how it would go with all these cheeses that I was tasting every day. So, okay. So the last cheese of the night is very familiar for us, Alpha Tolman. It's a Vermont classic. This cheese has anybody had Alpha Tolman before? Just raise your hand if you have. Okay. This is such a great cheese. I'm going to just say the sellers at Jasper Hill, they make beautiful cheeses. They became well known for making a cloth-bound cheddar, but then they started, they really evolved a lot from that. And I think they would probably agree that this is one of their most special cheeses. They invest a lot of time and energy into this cheese. So this is another raw milk cheese. This is considered an Alpine cheese. This cheese is one of the younger cheeses of the bunch. So this is only aged 8 to 12 months. I still wanted it to the end. I wanted to save it till the end, because I felt like, even though it is the youngest cheese, not one of, it is the youngest, it has like such a savory, brothy element to it. The other thing that I want you to consider about this cheese is the mouthfeel, and how silky it is. It's really special to get a cheese that's this silky, but also has such intense, savory, earthy notes to it as well. And so what's really cool about this cheese is, okay, I'm not going to nerd out about rennet tonight. I'm going to nerd out a little bit about rennet tonight. But early in the days of Voyage Fromage, we invited someone from Jasper Hill to do an entire hour-long session about rennet. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you can actually see the whole video, which features this cheese, and it shows how this cheese is made, including the rennet. And so I want to talk about the rennet because this is made with a traditional animal rennet, which is common in most cheese making. Most aged cheeses are made with animal rennet, but typically you would buy it from a cheese making supply. You know, it would come in a vial and it's liquid, and you add it, you know, during the cheese making process into the vat of milk. Now, what is special about Alpha Tolman, one of the special things, there's many special things, that they actually make their own rennet. It is called Sachs rennet. It is named after Anne Saxelby, who is, you know, very beloved and famous in the cheese world. And it is, so animal rennet it's derived from the lining of the fourth stomach of a calf. So how they've discovered this, there's stories. They think that somebody was carrying milk in a leather bag, which was quite literally once that stomach. And, you know, they're walking with the bag, and the motion and the enzymes being released turned that milk into cheese. And that's how the first ever cheese was made. Theories, again, this is all hearsay. But traditional animal rennet is derived from that. And so Jasper Hill goes through the very tedious task of, they quite literally have the dried animal stomachs, and they hand shave it into very thin wisps, because this is the beginning stage of what rennet becomes. And what they do is they also make a clarified whey in the cheese making process, and they mix these calf vels, which is the little tiny wisps of the stomach, with the clarified whey, and that's how they create their own sort of proprietary rennet. It is so uncommon. I think that they are the only producer in the United States making their own rennet. It is very uncommon. It's very labor intensive. But by doing it this really traditional way, it actually creates what their rennet has a very, very, very big impact on the flavor of cheese, like very big. And so it creates that savory animal brothy quality. And animal, not because it's animal rennet, but that is just when you use, for example, like a microbial rennet. It is that is tend to use it on younger cheeses, like a younger goat cheese, things like that, but it actually doesn't do well when you age it too long. So different rennets have different qualities, pros and cons, depending on what type of cheese you want to end up with. So they wanted to end up with a very traditional Alpine style cheese, and so they wanted to make it very traditionally. The other special thing about this cheese is the raw milk is from their own herd. They call it the Andersonville herd. And I visited the herd, and it's lovely. And it's just up the road from their cheese making facility. And they're very passionate about raw milk cheese. They don't only make raw milk cheese. They make raw milk and pasteurized. They do not have enough cows to make all their cheeses using their own cows. So they only make raw milk cheese with their own herd. Any milk that they're getting from neighboring farms is going to be pasteurized. And I visited, and those farms are also lovely and making beautiful milk, but it's just sort of their philosophical principle that if it's not coming from their own herd, they're going to pasteurize it. So some of their cheeses are raw, some of them are pasteurized. And then lastly, we talked a little bit about the rind and how that impacts the flavor. That also impacts the sort of animal brothiness, because they are using a cultured brine to, first of all, they give it a nice bath in this brine vat, and that helps to establish the pH of the cheese so that the rind has sort of a healthy environment to survive. I remember a cheesemaker telling me a story about one of his assistants draining his vat of brine, which is like the biggest no-no you could ever do because it takes time and cultures to develop the proper level of pH. And if you have the wrong pH in your brine, your rind doesn't work. You know, he was saying that for months and months, the rind would slip off the cheeses, and the cheeses were just struggling to ripen. Everybody has different philosophies when it comes to brine. We visited a producer in Belgium that had it was a cheesemaker called Hinkelspel, and they have a 40-year-old brine that literally looked like the elixir of life. It was beautiful. It just was so cloudy, and so basically they're, you know, creating this perfect environment using the, you know, the microbiome from all the cheeses of the past to help to establish quality cheese and quality rinds for rinds of the future. The other thing it does, if you peel off, if there's a label, peel it off, it's kind of hard to see. The rind, it's a little bit white right now, but typically, and that's because, again, mold is on all cheese. So that's a little bit of mold growth that happened under the label. But typically it's gonna, if you like, I'm eating this whole thing, so this is my personal cheese. So if you wet it a little bit, it's got a sort of orange tint to it. That's the Brevibacterium. That's the bacterial growth that I was talking about that loves warm, wet environments. And that bacterial growth thrives on like your gym shoes, for example. And so that's where stinky cheese, that sort of bad rap comes from, because it's literally the same bacterial growth. Shush. It's the same bacterial growth that grows and thrives in that warm, wet environment. And so don't be turned off necessarily by the smell of a cheese that has like a really pungent smell, because oftentimes the flavor profile is going to be totally different than the smell. All right, I've talked a lot, so I'm going to eat while I hear your feedback on this one. You can tell I'm a fan of this cheese. I do love this cheese. All right. That's fair. Dog is getting the cheese tax, right?
Excellent.
Good girl. Can you?
I
shake?
think this one benefited from warming up. I had to grab a bite when I was cutting it and getting it ready for the plate. And I was like, oh, this is nice. So much better now.
Right?
I mean, it was great, but now it's extraordinary.
So cheese is so frustrating because when you want to eat cheese, you want to eat cheese. And, you know, you like pull it out of the fridge and you start, but it is so important to wait for it to come to room temperature. And the same is true of wine. You don't necessarily want it to come to room temperature, but the fun thing with really good wine is open a bottle, you know, if it's a white wine, chill it and see how it changes as it warms up, because the aromas change, the texture changes. I always say if you have a really cheap wine, serve it really cold, because it's going to mute a lot of those negative qualities. But if you have a really beautiful wine, you want to watch it warm up a little bit, open up a little bit, and all those aromas. The same is true of cheeses. Like, it's also can be fun if you have mixed milk cheeses, like a Robiola Tre Latte, which has cow, sheep, and goat in it. When it's really cold, the goat is so pronounced, the flavor of the goat cheese. It's like that is the strongest flavor. But as it warms up, that starts to get more subtle, and you get more of the rich fattiness of the sheep's milk and the cow's milk. So it's really fun to see how temperature can change the quality of the cheese. But I 1,000,000,000% agree with you that this is so much better at room temperature. It wants to be, you know, a bit warmer. And this is, I mean, this is a great fondue cheese. This is a great cheese for grilled cheese. Like, This is definitely a great melter. And I think people think that melting cheese has to be, cheap cheese per se, but I think this is that perfect balance of you get everything out of it. You get that sort of creamy base, you get the savory notes. It's just, oh, it's so good.
This is my favorite. I like the rind, and it's delicious with the pepper jelly.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad you like it. I love this cheese. And I think we're very lucky in the States because, I talk about the Swiss Union, I talk about, PDO cheeses, I talk about like all these traditional European cheeses, which is important. Tradition matters, but there's also innovation. And we don't have any rules in the States when it comes to cheese, good and bad. And so what we see a lot of cheesemakers doing is visiting Europe, learning from European cheesemakers, and then bringing those techniques back and then doing things that feel right for the environment where we are. And so I think that's really special because when you look at the cheeses that Jasper Hill is doing and making, you see, UK references like with their Cabot cloth-bound cheddar. You see, Swiss and French references with their spruce bark wrapped cheeses. You've got the Alpha Tolman, which is an Alpine style. So you see where these references are coming from. Vermont Shepherd, he trained in the Pyrenees. He learned how to make very traditional Pyrenees Brebis. And so, it's very interesting to see these American cheesemakers and where their reference points are, but then watching them, kind of pivot and say, like, we're going to take these reference points and honor them, but then make a cheese that's right for our area. So any other thoughts? Any other favorite pairings or takeaways from the evening?
I could see this on a cheese plate with a brie and then the Alpha and then a nice English cheddar at the end. Different textures.
Right? And they actually make all three of those styles.
It would be great.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's the cool thing about this cheese too, and is that I wouldn't call it a strong cheese, but I wouldn't call it a mild cheese.
Right.
And so it makes it really great for a cheese board because it's not going to compete. It's not going to overwhelm. Like it's got a really nice balance to it. So
What kind of charcuterie would you put with that?
this one, okay, automatically, we have a really big salami called finocchiona.
Yeah.
It's the one that has fennel pollen in it though.
Yeah.
Which I love. I think that with this would be so good. That would be my go-to. I think a lot would be good with it, but that would be my go-to. So, because I think the fennel needs something to stand up to, and I think this can hang. So, can stand it down.
Do these three cheeses have similar price points?
That's a good question. The Monte, I should know that. The Monte Veronese Malga, generally the Italian mountain cheeses are way less expensive than you'd imagine.
Shocking. That's shocking.
Let me, this
I would have
is going to be fairly similar. The Alpha Tolman is probably the least expensive though, because it is made, tariffs have obviously changed the landscape of international cheeses and imported cheeses. That being said, I'm not going to obviously get too deep into it, but all of the cheese making equipment that the sellers at Jasper Hill uses has to come from Europe. And so they recently got a big shipment and got hit with a between $20,000 and $30,000 tariff bill because of the cost of their equipment that they had to import, because they have a lot of cheese making equipment needs and facility, and the cheese making equipment's very expensive. So that was so that it does impact our domestic producers as well. But that one right now on the board is the least expensive of the bunch. But the mountain cheeses from Italy, I think, are I would say somewhat undervalued. I think people often go for a name recognition with Italian cheeses. So Parmesan, Piave Vecchio. And so this kind of falls on the outskirts. And I don't think, and it's not exported to the US much. And cheese in Italy is very inexpensive. And so, you know, we're able to keep the price of that cheese actually fairly low, which is great. So
That was one of my favorite cheeses of all times, this Monte cheese.
yeah. Oh, that's great.
That's- yeah.
And you've tried a lot of our cheeses, so that's a huge compliment for that cheese. I mean, I find that cheese very unusual and unlike a lot of other cheeses. That this undertone of sweetness is just really, really cool.
Are these cheeses available all year round?
The Alpha Tolman is,
Okay.
but it will change from batch to batch. We do go to Jasper Hill twice a year to select our batches, because again, they can vary quite a lot. And we have a particular flavor profile that we like that's not necessarily, you know, if we just bought it from a distributor, you wouldn't necessarily be guaranteed to get what you want, but luckily we can work directly with them and pick. The Coeur de Savoie, this is going to be only something that we see in the wintertime
Okay.
for our shop. It's really more of a holiday cheese. The Monte Veronese, we try to have it year round, as much as we can. Our Italian producers, I love them, but their turnaround time on shipping cheeses is not always great. So it really depends on, you know, the timing, and sometimes it's like super fast and we never have a break in stock. And sometimes that is not the case. But the Monte Veronese, we do try to keep in stock all year round because it's become kind of a staple of our shop. We don't really carry Piave Vecchio because we want to point people to this cheese. We feel like if we got Piave Vecchio, they would miss out. Anytime someone comes in looking for Piave Vecchio, it gives us the opportunity to say, no, we don't have that, but try this. And then we get to introduce them to this cheese. So
Could you put a blue on a cheese plate with these three, or would it be too overpowering?
I would totally do a blue. I would do a blue in the sort of strength of like a Stilton or Bailey Hazen blue, which again, Jasper Hill also makes Bailey Hazen. So I would do something that's not super, like a Roquefort, I think would be too strong.
Right.
Or maybe Bleu d'Auvergne would be too strong. But again, if you get the right condiments mixed in, you get a little bit of wiggle room with that. So, but yeah, I think blue cheese always has, you know, just by it being blue does not necessarily make it too strong to play well with others. Any other thoughts or questions?
I have a question about the Belgian cheese that just won the best cheese thing.
Yes.
I just want to hear about that.
I saw that it was Belgium. I honestly have not looked into it, to be honest, because we've had a lot of events this week. Let me really quickly see which one it was. Do you remember the name of it?
I don't. I just know that it was a Gouda.
It was a Gouda, obviously.
I'd have to look, and I'll shoot you an email.
I thought Beth Ann would know because she's going to Belgium.
Belgium
know. Oh my
doing
God.
a cheese store in Belgium.
Oh, right. Yes, Belgium has some of the best cheeses. I mean, truly, and some of the best food. Honestly, I was shocked when I went to Belgium, and because I didn't know what to expect, and blew me away. Really incredible food culture, and cheese culture is incredible. So you're gonna have a great time. Any other questions? Such a great group tonight. Thank you guys all for coming. And
Thank you. Can
I
we get bread more often?
yeah, if
I would
everybody,
love to see. So this is my idea. When you send out the note saying, would you like anything extra, is that have a bread for us, because I love the breads that you send us. Oh my God. I'm in Florida. It's a wasteland.
honestly, my mom says this. I know now whenever my mom comes to visit, I have to have certain things in my fridge.
Mhm.
And then bread, fresh bread, because she makes her own bread, because you can't, in Eastern Oregon, like near Idaho, like there's nobody making fresh bread and baked in the way that we're so spoiled here. So
Mhm.
yes, noted. I've been enjoying sending things that I like to eat with cheese, and we only send bread that we know is going to hold up, because
Mhm.
not all bread is going to hold up till like a baguette is not going to hold up for the next day. It wouldn't be good. But some of these really hearty, thicker crusted breads hold up absolutely beautifully. So absolutely. So, and anybody who has suggestions can always send us an email and let us know, because we always like to tailor these events to you and what you're interested in. And so, next month, so I'm leaving for the UK on Thursday, and I'm going to be doing what's called the Northern Run. It's the first time I'm joining the owner of Neal's Yard Dairy, and we're going to do a selection. So we're visiting 10 dairies to select wheels of cheese for Neal's Yard. And so I get to tag along to see how they're selecting their cheeses, which I'm really excited about, because I'm going to try to get it's a whirlwind. I asked them if there's anything I should bring, and they said pack some vegetables, because all you're going to eat is cheese. And I was like, I'll be fine. I can survive on cheese. I'm just picturing like pulling broccoli out of my pocket. But so next month's theme appropriately is going to be UK cheeses. And so it's going to be all cheeses from Neal's Yard. We've got a special shipment coming in from them, including some really nice soft cheeses. And so really, really excited, because they've worked with us on the timing of the shipment, because it all comes by boat, so that we can get these cheeses that sometimes we only have in the shop for like a week.